they were sort of wide open to attack, and of course the Vikings were lining up with their longbows to nip across the North Sea and do a bit of plundering and pick the best looking girls and whip them off back up to Norway or wherever they came from, Denmark. And they had no way of defending against this. So what they thought was, one of the kings thought was, well, why don't we hire some soldiers to defend us? And they went out and they hired the Anglons and the Saxons. And they came over and they did a good job. And among other things, they kept the Scots north of the border, which is where they ought to be, and the Welsh west of the border, which is where they ought to be, because throughout our history, it's never the English who've been attacking the Scots or the Welsh, it's always been the Welsh and the Scots who've been attacking over the border, and then we've had to sort them out and send them back. So these Anglons and Saxons did a good job and they defended the country. But then this king, who was a bit of a plonker, said, well, thank you very much, but we're not going to pay you. So the Angles said, okay, fine, we'll take it in kind. We control the country, we're the military for the country, we'll take it in kind. And so they took over England. Now, in 871, a prince came to the crown by the name of Alfred. And Alfred was a Saxon, and he'd inherited the throne from his brother Ethelred, who died. He was, we believe, epileptic, so he had these fits all the time, so he wasn't a fit man. He's mourning his brother, he's epileptic, and he's got the Vikings and everybody else invading, and he has to fight them off. Well, we all know, don't we, about the story of Alfred burning the cakes. Well, this is because he'd gone into battle and he'd lost, and he went away and he was in the marshes, staying in a shepherd's house, and he was asked to watch the cakes, but in fact he was planning his next campaign, and of course the cakes got burnt, and he got a good rollicking off the housewife. Right? Because none of us men are immune from that, are we, fellas? Happens far too frequently, and it just goes to show what an understanding of what we are, really. Anyway, he then came back and he defeated the Vikings, and he beat them back north of Watling Street, which runs roughly across the middle of England through Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, all around that way. So he beat them back north of Watling Street, and then they called for a truce, and it was agreed that they could keep that bit and Alfred and his lot would keep this lot down here. Now, having done that, he was then elected by the people as the king of all of the English south of Watling Street. And Alfred had spent a bit of time in Rome as a young man, and he'd learned how to read and to write, and he thought education was altogether a good thing. So he set about educating his population, his subjects. And if you were an ealdorman and you couldn't read and write, and he would give you an opportunity, and he'd say to you, you know, you've got to learn to read and write, we'll supply the place for you to go to learn. And if the alderman said, no, I'm not going to do that, then what he would do is he would say, okay, fine, well, you step down as an alderman, because all my aldermen must be able to read and write, and he would appoint somebody else to that job. Now, having done all of that, and got the country on its way to achieving an education, and in a relatively safe system of government, which was immune to a large extent from foreign attack, because what he did, he fortified towns, he would organise a form of national service where half the people would be in the fields working, the other half would be fully booted and spurred, swords, shields, the lot, defending the town. If the town was attacked, the people would come in out of the field into the town, they'd get booted and spurred, and they would then defend the town, which was able to look after itself until such time as Alfred could get a larger force in to actually come to its assistance. So it's quite a good, sensible system. He also built large ships, much bigger than the Viking ships, so they could go out to sea and they could defeat the Vikings at sea before they got their feet on the ground. All of that is very important, all of that is very interesting. But the most important thing that Alfred did was he went around and he went to all of the old kingdoms and he looked at all of their laws and customs, and he put all of their laws and customs in a book of law which he called the Dome. And he took the Dome to the Witan and he said, "Is this good law?" And the Dome said, "Yes, it is." And it was then promulgated throughout the whole of Alfred's England as Alfred's law, the King's law, which is where we get the saying today, don't we? It's the Queen's law. And it came from Alfred the Great. Now, having done that, and eventually, obviously, like we all must, I'm not, but everybody else is, but he died. Until such time as Edward the Confessor came to the throne, his grandson, whose name escapes me for the time being, became the king of the whole of England. When Edward the Confessor was on the throne, he altered the laws very slightly, but not a lot. But we still had Alfred's law. When William the Conqueror came and killed Harold at Battle of Hastings, because he had never recognised Harold as king, William the Conqueror, the first thing he did, he said, "Well, I will keep the laws of Edward the Confessor." Now that was actually quite a sensible thing to do, because if you just captured a whole country, to try and impose an alien set of law on them at the same time is completely impractical, because nobody will know what the law is or anything else. So he kept the law of England, which was Alfred's law. Now in 1100, when William Rufus was on the throne, he decided that he would in fact rule not by Alfred's law, but by divine right. And he was doing things which were illegal under the law, and eventually poor William Rufus was out hunting one day when an arrow went astray and struck him through the heart. And when you work out that our longbowmen of those periods could take the eye out of a pigeon at 300 yards, you know, how good a chance is it that it wasn't actually aimed? But William Rufus died. Henry I came to the throne, and Henry I thought, well, okay, I'm going to rule by divine right. And the barons got a hold of him and said, "Hang on a minute, you can't do that, because, you know, your brother was a pain in the neck, and basically what we've got to do now is we've got to have you rule according to law." Henry I then was forced to issue the Charter of Liberties of 1100. That in fact was a restatement of the laws of King Alfred. Now, in 1213, King John was having a lot of problems because he wasn't a nice man. If you were a baron and you had a particularly good-looking young wife, John would take her off and sleep with her. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he would then go into court and he would tell everybody at the top of his voice how good or bad she was in bed. So he wasn't actually very popular. Not by the barons, and because he was suppressing the entire population using foreign mercenaries, because our own people wouldn't do it, he wasn't very popular with the common man either. So there was a lot of people who wanted to kill King John. And in order to protect himself, he went down to Dover, where he met the papal legate, a bloke called Archbishop Pandulph, and he gave England to the Pope. And he got it back to rule as a vassal king of Rome's for 1,000 marks a year. And he took on the mantle of a crusader, so that anybody who killed him would in fact be excommunicated. And as everybody in those days who was brought up to believe in the religion, which they all were, to be excommunicated meant that you suffered eternal damnation, and nobody wanted that. So he felt himself a little bit safer. And he carried on as he had been, not being a very nice bloke at all. Well, in 1215 he was forced to meet with the barons at Runnymede. But what we're not told at school, because we're all told at school that King John had to go and, well, not told at school today, I have to tell you, but we were told at school, that King John was forced to meet the barons at Runnymede, and he was forced to sign Magna Carta. But it wasn't just the barons at Runnymede, because nobody in this country liked him at all. So when word got out that King John was meeting the barons for a confrontation at Runnymede,